Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's fireside chat. I'm really excited about it. Email stops fraud, the 101 of fraud prevention using AtData. So I'm Lizzie Hoffman. I'm part of the marketing team here at AtData. And while we give everyone a minute or two to join in, I want to go through a couple housekeeping items. So first things first, today's chat is fully recorded. No need to sit and take copious notes. Everything's going to be recorded and you'll receive that in a follow-up email over the next couple of days. There is also the opportunity to ask questions. You have the questions module in your GoToWebinar session. We're going to get to those at the end of the session today, so feel free to shoot questions in there throughout the chat. We'll get to them at the end. Additionally, Phil and Diarmuid, I know are excited because we're going to be at Money 2020 later this month. I'm going to let Phil and Diarmuid talk to that throughout the presentation, but we're going to be there in the follow-up that you're going to receive with the recording along with the additional materials. There's going to be an opportunity for you to book time to chat with Phil and Diarmuid and the AtData team at Money 2020. So we're really excited about that. Phil, Diarmuid, let's start with Phil. I'd love for you guys to give a quick intro about yourselves.
Right. Yep. Hi, everybody. First off, thanks for taking the time out of your day to spend with us. We really do appreciate it. I'm Phil Davis. I'm our Chief Business Officer here at AtData. Just a little bit about AtData. Our mission is to help our clients get more out of their first-party data. And it means a lot of things for our clients, but when it relates to fraud, it means keeping fraudsters out of their database. And so we have some great programs and services to help our clients do that. And those efforts are led by Diarmuid and his team. And we're really fortunate to have such a team of esteemed experts in the fraud space. So Diarmuid, why don't you do a quick intro, and then we'll get right into our session.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. So my name is Diarmuid Thoma. So this year marks 21 years in fraud prevention. I can't quite believe that, but it's true. So yeah, I'm from everything from in Facebook to semantic to telecoms. It's been a varied fraud prevention journey for me, but it's changed so much. But I joined as the kind of head of fraud basically for AtData now over a year ago, and yeah, kind of heading up some of the new features we'll touch on today, and some of the new features you can see on our website as well.
Fantastic.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. Phil,
all right. Well,
take it away.
Let's get in. Yeah, let's get into it. We start with this infographic, and it's interesting. You know, I've seen this infographic a number of times, and when I look at it from a different perspective, I'm struck by the tension and the partnership that's required between customer acquisition and fraud prevention. So as you can see, customers are demanding a frictionless process when they're signing up for an account, but fraud continues to spike. And so, you know, it's really important for us to manage that tension and that balance. So Diarmuid, you know, we're seeing more companies and more sectors concerned with fraud. Tell me a little bit about more what we're seeing here on this infographic.
Yeah, I mean, like I think you nailed it, right? So there's nearly more infographics than there is fraud out there. You know, when you look in the web, you know, on the web, and some of them even conflict with each other and everything. But like, so if you take them all, and even the ones we have here, I'd agree. I think like the one that strikes me here is the 92% and the 88%, because what they highlight is pretty much the challenge from the get-go with fraud prevention, which is the balancing act between trying to grow your customers and, you know, get more and more customers, more and more revenue and that, but also reduce your fraud rate. And traditionally they collapse a bit, you know, in terms of or certain conflict between what the two are trying to do. So like, you know, in the case of customer growth, so you're getting more and more, and we'll do promotions to get more customer growth, but then of course that comes with risk, right? And we've seen that particularly recently with the example here with credit card fraud, right? So yeah, and credit card fraud has even changed since in the last couple of years now, that, you know, less signatures, so that's promoted more kind of even friendly fraud, you know, on the cards as well. So it's crazy, but But that ratio is something that's been consistent, but it's a constant battle, and getting even those margins are getting finer and finer as the years go by.
Yeah, and it really sits right in that point, especially when you think about that tension. It's customer acquisition right at that registration, right? So marketers like, I need a skinny form. I need it easy for my customers to get in there. By the way, we've just launched our app, and we're finally, we have commerce going through the system. And so suddenly we're a little more vulnerable than we were prepared to be. And so, and that's where AtData kind of fits in. So let's go to the next slide. It's clear that the cost of fraud continues to rise, and it gets difficult to quantify the overall damages. Certainly it's easy to look at your chargebacks and see the cost of those, look at your coupon abuse and see the cost of coupon abuse. There's certainly the cost of returns, right? But there's so many other unintended costs associated with, fighting fraud and dealing with so many fraudsters. Diarmuid, let's talk a little bit about some of these other, less obvious concerns.
Yeah, I mean, so most people, on this call and listening will be familiar with the obvious costs, right? So, if you're doing transactional, right, there's the loss of the goods themselves. So if you're doing physical goods, you've sold and lost those goods. But then to double down on that, you've also now received a charge back on top of that. So that's you now double that loss. And then and even for those customers and those companies that lose out, there's the kind of customer trust is also is being eroded and lost. So they've loads of people talk about them quite often, and these figures that you have here, they'll reflect them, in terms of the billions, and those, as you said, the billions is billions and billions. It keeps getting higher every year we go through. But the interesting thing for me is and the bit that's not really talked about much is the fear of fraud, right? So the fear of fraud is actually the number in terms of revenue is bigger, generally speaking, than fraud itself, because the fear of fraud represents, so I suppose the best example, if I say, on average, a customer might have a 2% to a 5% fraud rate, right? So that's, and that'd be something you can expect. But to go in and fix it by obviously declining those, but also declining maybe 10% of your client base while trying to stop the 2%, well, it's not really a solution. It's a kind of like having a sore finger and deciding that you should chop off your arm just to fix it, So that's the real challenge, and that false positive element of that is probably the most important thing, right? So and you'll hear that more and more people saying, taking almost the fraud prevention side for granted, and yeah, of course you're going to catch fraud, but what's your false positive rate? And it really is one of the most important metrics, because anybody can go in with a sledgehammer and fix a 2%, 5% fraud issue. If you reject half the transactions, yeah, you will definitely reduce your fraud, but you'll remove a lot of your actual good customers. So it's not a solution. So the challenge for fraud companies is to get increasingly accurate and getting increasingly better at their predictive and getting more aligned with or being able to separate their frictionless good customers over here with the the fraudulent customers over there, which obviously you want to have a lot of friction on.
Yep, for sure. So let's jump in and look at one of our clients. We have a major fast food chain, as you can see, we've got these beautiful charts and graphs. So Diarmuid, let's help everyone make sense of what they're looking at here, and how we were able to help them identify fraud, this global issue that they faced.
Yeah, and actually this one is really interesting. So this is what's referred to as coupon abuse or coupon fraud. So this is, so they operate globally, this particular client, and they have individual installations with us in each country. But what was really interesting before I go into these rates is that this trend for them replicated almost exactly from country to country. So it wasn't just a country issue. It was pretty much the same. The graphs look very similar from Europe to the US to wherever. But you'll see here, and the first chart represents our ML risk score, which is the combination of our entire product effectively. And, basically half of their transactions were scoring high risk. First, you're as a fraud person, you're kind of saying, first you think, okay, there's something wrong there. When we started looking into it, no, it turned out that half of the traffic or half the applications through this app were actually completely fake, completely fraudulent. And, when we looked at the ages, which is the second chart, the longevity there, so 0 being brand new emails, you can see the correlation and the stiff correlation then on the high risk demographic. So they're basically newly created emails, and then they would run back to get the coupons that they needed out, and they would resell them and so on. And then finally, if you move to the bottom, then you see like validation, and again, the correlation of invalid or fake emails completely used there on the higher end demographics. I suppose one of the more interesting ones, and people don't get to see a lot of, and certainly don't get to see it stop, is the tumbling. So they, as part of that, they used a very kind of interesting technique, which is pretty much used in every business online. You see it from a fraud perspective anyway. And these were the tumbled emails. So I think we have some examples of them. Now we've modified them slightly, but there's some examples here of some of the emails that we received. Again, we've changed the domains and that kind of stuff here, but you see here how they've rewritten the same email multiple times. Now we receive tens and thousands or even hundreds of thousands of these every day, right? This and variations of it. So we actually check our entire network, which is pretty comprehensive from a global perspective, and we look for kind of consistencies and trends on that. So this is, in this case, it worked very, very well because it was a tool that the fraudster was using to kind of just use the same email to create thousands of applications through this coupon abuse. So yeah, it was a good one, and it was nice to that it was such a clean cut in terms of the fraud, and practically no false positives actually in this case.
Right. And so what's interesting also is it's just, again, it's at that account creation, right? So the real opportunity is to stop these fraudulent users or customers from getting, access to your programs and services and getting them into your CRM, so you're stopping them in your track. And so being able to recognize tumbling is certainly a real tremendous value add.
Well, yeah, I mean, to all our clients, like generally speaking, we get integrated in multiple places, but like that front end integration on your account creation, your new accounts, your new clients coming in, that has to be one of the primary ones. Once you can clean up that entrance point, everything downstream of it, it's not fixed by any means because you have account takeovers and things like that, but it certainly makes things a lot easier when you know that you've done a lot of the front end work.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Diarmuid, this is a great example of how risky emails can lead to fake account creation. Let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about, so we've covered kind of registrations. Let's talk a little bit about transactions and account management.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when we talk about registrations, we assume everybody, every website you have to create an account, and that's just not the case, right? So there's guest checkout, and there's just no accounts at all in some websites. So, from a transactional point of view, email, again, one of the great things about email is that it's consistency. It exists in every kind of point in the customer journey. But in the transactional side, as the transaction is going through, you get to validate the email as valid and how old is it, it's just been created and that kind of stuff. So it gives you huge amounts of information at the transaction point, and because it can do it quickly, it's very easy to do it in real time. The account management then is similar. It's actually kind of tied to registrations in a way because it's now they have the account. It's 2 years old, but it's the responsibility, ideally, of the companies who hold those accounts, accounts for their customers, to maintain those accounts, to make sure that they're secure, the data is protected, et cetera, et cetera. And one way that, when we talk about account takeover, one of the more often than not, actually, is the emails have to be changed because from a fraudster, they don't want the email notification going to the legitimate account holder. So when they take the account over, one of the first things they'll try and do is change that that email. So what we do there at that point is we'll verify the IP, we'll verify the new emails that, yeah, this is high risk, low risk. So it, again, puts an extra layer on the existing accounts, because and you'd be surprised how often that's overlooked for some companies.
Absolutely. All right. Well, so when you think about those items, and you know, we've spent a lot of time thinking about how fraud happens and how we can help our customers. You know, fighting this fraud, 40% of fraud users will use a newly created email, 10% use a fake email. Now, at AtData, we have a massive database. So like our arsenal is a result of this massive database with lots of updates. So it becomes kind of that advantage that we have to help us fight fraud with our clients. Diarmuid, can you talk a little bit more about that advantage? And then on the next slide, we'll get into some of the features and functions that go into building a risk score.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to say, you know, when we say that emails and, you know, is in transaction, it's in account, and it's in there, but that's only great if you can actually use the data, right? You know, and AtData is one of the rare companies that has been, you know, we've been running for 20 years, and we've managed to correlate like such a large kind of database where our recognition rate is 98 plus and sometimes 99% of emails that so we receive an email, we have history of for the vast majority, and the ones that we don't is because they're new, you know. So, you know, the accuracies and all this kind of subsequent information that we supply with it, be it our IP, our, you know, our VM detection, our proxy detection, and so on, all accompanies that, right? So then that's the key to the accuracy, is that contextual data. And even when you look at the 98% versus the 40%, it's actually that difference in percentage that means that that's how you're getting such that's how accurate we are in terms of the fraud correlation, because there's such a massive discrepancy between the good demographic, who largely make up that 98%, luckily, and the fraudsters, the 40%. So the disparity between those, and from a profiling, if you're using, you know, ML or using even just a basic decision tree, is what makes email one of the most, if not the most, single accurate data element available.
Absolutely. So, all right, so let's look at the fields on the next slide. And keep in mind, you know, what we're talking about is the input is an email address. And some of our clients will input an email plus the IP. And in general, those are two fields you're collecting, right, with every registration. So, you know, whether someone's registering for a service, making a purchase, download an app, requesting information, you know, you have this as part of that frictionless process. So the input to us will be an email address and an IP often. Diarmuid, let's talk about how these features work together to create the risk score.
Yeah, and like the thing is, you know, these are kind of the high level features. I suppose the API does output the risk score as well as all this data that we see. And I suppose like any good platform, no one of these is good enough on its own, right? So what this is effectively a layered decision model. So, you know, we have the likes of in the first, you know, green cog there, you have tumbling, right? Tumbling, it's not necessarily the highest rate of fraud, right? So it's highly accurate, because the way that we built it, its false positive rate is practically zero, simply because it can separate from standard normal kind of email evolution as a legitimate person would do, versus the malicious one that fraudsters do. So while it's not the highest percentage, it is highly visible, so clients, you know, can see it, and everybody knows that oh yeah, that's fraud. And the fact that it's highly accurate makes it incredibly powerful in the decisioning, and we heavily leverage our database size for this one, because we actually not just the data that we've got, we actually go across our entire platform to analyze that tumbling. Then you have below that, you have the behavioral insight. So this is our activity side of the kind of the decision side. So how active is the email? How you know, what's its velocity in the last 6 months? What's its popularity? And the popularity is interesting. It's how many different places are we seeing the email, right? So you can have high velocity that could be coming from a single site, or you can have medium velocity coming from lots of different sites. and they're not necessarily bad or good. What they are is contextual, right? And now, you know, when you start going through it and you start going through the other features, you start to say, okay, so if I'm, let's say, an old email that's got a good history and they do regular cadence and I've got relatively high velocity and popularity, that's a great client. Now, flip that as a new email coming in on a Tor proxy, newly created email, and it's got high velocity popularity. Now that's really bad, you know. So those two are contextual, but it enriches the decision massively. The domain analysis is a new feature which monitors the kind of the global domain as they originate. So this is important because it's as they become active, not necessarily when the domain is registered, because that's arguably not that accurate. It's when they become active. We're not interested in Gmail and Hotmail for this one because they're tens, right? They're way up there in volume, way up there in age. We're interested in the new domains coming on the scene with some of the, and there's thousands of them, but very suspicious activity that comes with it. And again, all the others add that context about what's good and what's bad. The IP then finally finishes out, and it really does bring a huge amount of insight and kind of aggregates all that together, you know, to provide that context, like I mentioned earlier, about like if it's Tor, then, you know, or any one of those, you know, web proxies, or if it's a legitimate person coming in on their standard IP from their house, you know, and then location matches, etc., etc. And we have all that kind of contextual data to cross-reference against. And of course, one of the AtData kind of mainstays and you know, one of the cornerstones of what we do is validation, right? Is the email valid? Is it just made up and none of the other matters? They just made it up as soon as they put the application in. That's important, you know. And then finally, I suppose with the consortium, this is because we have the ability to take in performance data and then feed back into our models, which are customized for each client. That brings all of what we're talking about together. And then it can be kind of relayed into finally the risk score. So the risk score is the ML kind of side of things for us, and it aggregates basically all the data that we've kind of gone through today and is in that cone to an easy to use and easy to understand risk score from 0 to 100. So that again, you know, you don't have to be a data scientist, you don't have to be, you know, a specialist in fraud for 20 odd years. You know, the high risk 90 to 100 is bad and 0 is good. All right. So it's basically us, you know, being able to accommodate the product for lots of different users, you know, out there.
Absolutely. And that's you know, when I look at the slide, it does bring home the idea that, you know, if you're from a company that has a great data science team, we have the granular fields that allow you to feed it into your algorithms. Yeah. But you know, if you're a mid-sized retailer and you're focusing on selling great shoes, you might not have a great data science team in there. We provide you with the full score so that you can stay just as safe. And I think that's really interesting.
It's interesting is that was as you described it, was pretty much the intention of the design in terms of the risk score. But what we found over the last year or so is more and more of the, you know, the guys with the big guys with their ML teams, with the, you know, the data science teams using the score, because it is customizable and has such strong correlation that they actually end up using it in their modeling, which wasn't really the design, but it's great to see that happening.
Absolutely. And then from you know, I ran an agency for years, and it's interesting. I think about the clients I had, and when I was acquiring an email address as a part of a registration, which represented a customer, I was spending, you know, low end $25 per acquisition for a customer, up to, you know, $150 per acquisition. And with this tool for just pennies, right, I can weed out my fraudsters. I also, because you do it at the point of registration, not only can I weed out fraudsters, but I can also tie it back to sources really nicely. So if I have an affiliate program, I've got sub-affiliates, I could really find quickly which of my sub-affiliates are sending me more fraud traffic versus others, so I could easily turn them on and off. So for pennies, it's a huge value add for any of our clients. So with that, let's take a look on the next slide at one of the challenges that faces one of our clients. I think it's a super interesting customer. So it's a peer-to-peer payment platform. All of us have used peer-to-peer payment platforms at some point to make a payment. And it's a tricky nature because they have people who register to receive payments, and they have people who come on the platform to make payments. So there's fraud coming at you from lots of different directions. Diarmuid, why don't you talk through, the challenge, how we help them, with the solution, the results we were able to bring to our clients.
Yeah, this one is particularly interesting because, I mean, some of the challenges weren't overly new, but this was a newly created kind of platform, payments platform. So they were, I don't want to say green, but there was a lot of challenges both with the growth coming in that they were trying to promote, as well as in the choice. So we kind of like what we mentioned earlier, but at a huge scale, because they're trying to grow massively, and that's their main focus. So but the problem was that it worked well for a couple of months, but of course then fraudsters took advantage of their, the structure with any new platform, any new company. So the rates of fraud and chargebacks and fake accounts being created just blew them out of the water, and that's not good, particularly for a payments platform, because they're not only worried about the chargeback side, but they have obligations on AML and KYC, etc. So that was their challenge. We spoke with them, and they basically, I mean, like most of our clients, we ran a test. We took sample sets of the data, we ran it to models retrospectively, and they could pretty much saw the correlation on how we would do it. The integration was literally, I think, was weeks after that. So where the integrated, I think we touched on it before, was the onboarding, of course, for the new account side of that, the transactional side, because with payments, it's a bit different. With the payments provider, it's a bit different because you have a sender and a receiver, right? So there's a whole different dynamic to the fraud, because, I've come across some very interesting ones where, with money laundering, for example, the account is legitimately set up, but the receivers are fake. Right, so there's thousands and thousands of dollars going to hundreds of different accounts, but all those accounts are newly created and fake. So there's a lot to take into account. But and then finally, I mentioned about the kind of account changes. So for compromised accounts, again, if you have a registered payment option in these accounts, you need to be able to protect the account very well. So any changes that were made to the account, they're also running through us. So the result, on the registrations was dramatic, right? Within a couple of weeks, you saw huge reductions in the not only obviously in the fraud and that, but the attempt rate, because after a couple of days, they realized that none of this is getting through. So the attempt rate on the fraud dropped as well. So this, within pretty short term, of course, that had a pretty big impact on the transactional side, because, as I said, it kind of flows downstream, and then that provided a greater insight, I suppose, to their KYC and their ML processes, right? So they could finally see, the disparity between what was good traffic and versus bad, and they didn't have that insight prior to that. The outcome is probably is a given, right? But like the customers, there was less complaints. There was, I think they were very happy, and not only happy with the results, but happy at the speed that it would happen. Because we don't talk about it often, but because the platform is so large, we don't have the same kind of ramp up time that many fraud platforms do. We're pretty much accurate from the get go. Now we do refine models and things like that for certain clients, but because we have such a high recognition, it's plug in and go, and that's rare in the fraud prevention world. And it makes it, for a lot of customers, it's the first thing they'll plug in for that reason, gets them off the ground, gets them running, and they might add in phone and device and so on. But it is a primary detection method.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a great summary. While this client might look like they present some unique challenges, there's similar challenges to so many of other clients. I think it's just magnified because they have two separate, opportunities for fraud from two different cohorts. But it's very similar to the same challenges that certainly many of you on the phone might be on the webinar might be facing. So at any rate, it was a fantastic summary. Thanks, Diarmuid. Why don't we allow a few moments for some questions? I think a few were probably submitted. And so Lizzie has taken time to pull some of these down and can shoot those questions over.
Yeah, and just before that, so you guys see on your screen, there's all the info for both Phil and Diarmuid if you want to reach out to them, as well as the information about us and our Money 2020 booth. So this is all, again, going to be in the follow-up. But in the meantime, questions. One that came through is, I see longevity, tumbling, and validation. Do you have more signals to detect fraudulent, risky registration?
Yeah, we do, and I mean they're an important part of it. But like we have, and each one of them has subcategories as well. So we mentioned earlier about like the tumbling detection, the domain analysis, all the risk score itself, as well as the IP information, right? So these are hefty. In fact, they're probably doubled up the amount of information coming back on the API. So there is a huge amount and growing. So we're by no means we're finished, in terms of our expansion of the product. And there's a lot planned for 2023 in terms of where we're going with that. So yeah, there's a lot more, and there's a lot more to come.
Sweet. So in kind of talking about these growth options for 2023, there's a question about how difficult this is at the current point in time to add to an existing tech stack. You touched on it a little bit earlier, but I think someone's asking for a little more detail.
Sure.
It is, and like I've been a customer as well of this product, years ago. But like it is one of the nicer ones to integrate. Like it doesn't have any webhooks, it doesn't have a complicated CRM integration. It is literally, you get your email and you get your IP, you send on the API at whatever point you want, and you get your decision back in real time. And it can even be customized. So as far as fraud solutions go, it doesn't really get much easier to integrate. And if you have a dedicated developer on it, you're talking hours even in terms of integration if you want.
Yeah, and I was at a client site when they took our API docs, and an engineer built the test into a live test right there, and it took very little time. And I think what they were most impressed with, because of the way the output is, the logic of what to do with the results took very little time to also build. So
that's a super point. Yeah, like actually quite commonly when customers test, well, we can do comprehensive batch testing where we get a file in and do that, but actually quite often the customer, because it's so easy, they just fully code to the API and just run the test via the API. So that gives you an idea of how quickly you really can code to and get data back.
Makes sense. Another one came through. In what part of the process have you seen the best benefit for customers? So for example, at the registration phase, at the payment phase, where does this really shine?
I suppose the most obvious one is definitely at onboarding, at registration, right? Because it's the most immediate and that, but it does depend on the client, right? Because as I mentioned earlier, not everybody has an onboarding flow. So some of them are straight to transaction. And we had one recently, they were a global kind of retailer effectively, and they didn't have any onboarding. So it was straight into the transactional side. So for them, obviously, all transactional. So, but I would say, yeah, most often, and particularly, when we talked about the tumbling earlier, you often, in almost always see that on the onboarding and the registration side. So there's a bit of visible impact as well. So you see immediately like these really crappy accounts coming out and being stopped, and there's a sense of satisfaction, I guess, from that, So yeah, I think that's probably it. And then the change of accounts, so when details are getting changed, that's not like the volume there is quite low, because you're not changing, they're not changing 50% of your client base all the time, so it's quite rare. So it's less extent, but it's an important one, but so as a safeguard.
Great. I think, Lizzie, we might have time for one more question if there is.
Yeah, one more just rolled through. So it's asking about what are some of the challenges that you see in the next few years? Obviously, this is kind of grown and compounded over the last couple of years, but moving forward, what do we think some of the challenges are?
Yeah, that's a big question. That's another hour in this, I think, you know. I suppose, like, you know, when we talk about the challenges, there's one that's ongoing and is increasing, and that's the constant kind of, I suppose, not conflict, but, you know, there's a greater demand and requirement for data privacy. So both from companies and from, you know, from people, rightly so. But the conflict is that fraud prevention largely depends on the data access. So there's this constant kind of, you know, requirement for data, you know, from fraud prevention and the fraud prevention platforms out there, with a greater emphasis on the privacy. I don't think it's ever going to shut down the fraud prevention industry or anything like that. But like, it is always a concern, you know, trying to maintain your compliance with CCPA and GDPR while respecting the client's privacy and data retention policies, etc., but keeping your accuracy up as high as possible and your false positives as low as possible. So that's not an old problem, but it's those margins are getting tighter and tighter.
Yeah, and I would think the secondary challenge I see just comes from, you know, the rapid self-service digital transformation that we've seen. I think that, you know, the couple year and a half or so of lockdown really accelerated that, and it's going to continue. You know, whether you're a coffee shop or you're, you know, a quick transaction in your neighborhood, more and more people are using apps for payments than ever before. And, you know, fraudsters look for newly created vulnerable systems. And so it's a natural.
I'd say as well, apart from the fraudsters, but from like genuine users, their expectation on delay is practically zero. I was actually, I think it was a comedy, but it was something about saying that my son gets bored waiting for the app to load. You know, so like, you know, the tolerance for delay is nothing. So we're getting faster, we're getting more accurate, we're getting, you know, more so it's all of these pushing forward. And as you said, like, particularly over the last few years with the COVID evolution, whatever, that's just rapid. That should have happened over a decade. Like, it's happened in 2 years. So it's fun. I mean, it's fun to try and keep up with it. It's fun to, you know, come out on top of it. But yeah, it's a really important point. Like,
absolutely. Well, this was a great opportunity to talk about fraud. And Diarmuid, thanks for your time. And Lizzie, thank you so much. Again, Diarmuid and I will both be at Money 2020. I don't know if we've mentioned that yet. And you'll get an email with a recording. If you want to set up time to speak with us there or beforehand, feel free to use the links in those emails to reach us. And we're excited to, you know, be out in person talking to many of our clients and prospects in the next coming weeks. So thank you again so much for your time. Diarmuid, thank you. Lizzie, thank you again. And everyone, have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.